Hello everypony, and welcome back to my first video in 3 weeks. Sorry about the wait, it was caused mainly by holiday, but partly by technical failings when I returned. Either way, it's great to be back, and hopefully you'll agree it was worth the wait, especially with what I've got lined up for next week. This week, however, will act as a belated response to NeoZhinzo's video, What Are the Elements of Harmony?, in which I will answer just that, using evidence from the show, and finally, some actual Gnosticism. So let's get started. In his video, NeoZhinzo argues that, as is seemingly obvious, the elements of harmony are magical artifacts.
The elements by their nature change and adapt depending on how they're needed, how they're used, and who uses them. In ye olden days, when they belonged to both Luna and Celestia, the elements were oversized, simply shaped, neatly cut, non-set, multicolored gemstones. For whatever reason, at some point in time after Discord and Nightmare Moon were sealed, the elements turned to stone orbs with various engraved shapes on them, and one of them went missing. The final shape the elements took when the main cast inherited them is the shape of set gemstones in golden accessories.
He calls them gemstones, but allows for their adaptability as they come to reform themselves depending upon the user. Now his analysis of their use is incredibly well put together. The emphasis he places on the different kinds of love, storge, philia, eroge, and agape, is truly inspired. That being said, this video is concerned not with how the elements are wielded, but with their ontology, what they actually are. To me, his assertion that the elements are magical artifacts, even versatile ones, conflicts with everything we know about them and how they are presented in the show.
You think you can destroy the elements of harmony just like that? Well, you're wrong, because the spirits of the elements of harmony are right here! What? Applejack, who reassured me when I was in doubt, represents the spirit of honesty. Fluttershy, who tamed the manticore with her compassion, represents the spirit of kindness. Pinkie Pie, who banished fear by giggling in the face of danger, represents the spirit of laughter. Rarity, who calmed a sorrowful serpent with a meaningful gift, represents the spirit of generosity. And Rainbow Dash, who could not abandon her friends for her own heart's desire, represents the spirit of loyalty. The spirits of these 5 ponies got us through every challenge you threw at us.
You still don't have the 6th element. The spark didn't work.
But it did. A different kind of spark. I felt it the very moment I realized how happy I was to hear you, to see you, how much I cared about you. The spark ignited inside me when I realized that you all are my friends. You see, Nightmare Moon, when those elements are ignited by the spark that resides in the heart of us all, it creates the 6th element, the element of magic.
It is clear in the show that Nightmare Moon believes, just as NeoZhinzo, that the elements were merely magical artifacts which, once destroyed, were worthless. However, Twilight corrects her, showing how, rather than the elements of harmony being physical artifacts, they are metaphysical forms. The trap Nightmare Moon and NeoZhinzo fall into is that of focusing on the physical alone, and to explain this, I will have to explain Plato's famous theory of forms. Plato's most famous work, The Republic, is concerned mainly with answering the question, what is the good? However, laced throughout it, and Plato's other dialogues, is Plato's metaphysical theory of existence, the theory of forms. Plato, like many before and after him, was concerned with how the senses can be tricked, or more precisely, that they could not hold perfect, unchanging knowledge. Plato writes, the sense into whose domain hardness falls is also the domain into which softness falls. Thus, in its perception, the same thing is both hard and soft. In other words, all sensory input is based on a false dichotomy. Hard is only differentiated from soft by an arbitrary cut in the spectrum, dividing it into 2 halves. All the sense does is place a cut in the line, but in calling something hard, it does not actually learn anything about it, as someone else's sense may cut it at a different point in the spectrum. Since all sensory input is necessarily this transient, Plato was faced with the question of how any perfect knowledge, such as the concept of hardness itself, came from, as nothing in the sensory process gave the information to us. The answer he arrived at was that the universe contained metaphysical forms of objective truth, to which the soul looks in order to gain knowledge. All physical things are known to us because we recognize them as copies of forms. participating in the form it is known as. So we know a wall is white because we recognise the form of white imperfectly recreated in it. The forms themselves are intelligible only because they participate in the form of goodness, which is the supreme form of knowledge. The way he explained all this is through the analogy of the cave. In the analogy, prisoners are held in a cave, facing a wall, whereupon a shadow puppet show is being performed. Since they have been forced to look at this their entire life, Plato suggests the shadows would constitute the only reality they would know. These prisoners represent those blinded by reality into thinking that the senses offer true knowledge, when in fact all it lets us glimpse are transient shadow-like knowledge, imitations of real things. These are everyday people, like you and me. The puppet masters are using a fire, and they believe themselves masters of knowledge as they can deceive the prisoners. But they too, just as our leaders in the real world, are also blinded by reliance on the senses. Suddenly, one of the prisoners is set loose, and as he makes his way out into the day, his eyes are hurt as he is confronted by light for the first time. However, slowly he adjusts and comes to realize that everything he and his peers see is the sun's responsibility. The escaped prisoner has seen the light, as it were, that the sunlight is true reality, whereas the shadows are false imitations of reality. Similarly, the forms are true reality in our world, while the visible world of sense is merely imitation. Plato calls the sun the child of goodness, saying, as goodness stands in the intelligible realm to intelligence and the things we know, so too does the sun stand in the visible realm and the things we see, reflecting the role of goodness to make the other forms intelligible. Plato suggests that only philosophers who have acquired knowledge of the good will be able to acquire true, unchanging knowledge, as they will have complete knowledge of the other forms through that of goodness. Thus he asserted that a perfect society could only exist when philosophers became kings, or when kings and rulers today truly became philosophers. Now, as awesome as that assertion may be, what does any of this have to do with the elements of harmony? If I am right, everything. Nightmare Moon is blinded by her reliance on sensory input, and believes the physical elements, the stones she destroys, constitute the elements of harmony. NeoZhinzo seems to be of the same opinion. However, Twilight understands that elements exist on a metaphysical level as the forms of honesty, kindness, generosity, loyalty, and laughter. She also realizes that only one who understands the form of the good, which is pure knowledge, can truly understand the other forms, and that this is what the element of magic is. The representation of the elements of harmony in the main six is due to them participating in their respective forms, along with Twilight's knowledge of goodness in magic, which, being metaphysically perfect knowledge, allows her power not withheld by physical limitations, as it is drawn from a realm well beyond them. So in conclusion, due to the limits of reality in the physical realm, the elements are not mere physical trinkets, but rather metaphysical forms beyond the physical realm entirely. Twilight's spark is her glimpsing the light and realizing her knowledge of the form of the good, also known as the element of magic, and in doing so, Twilight becomes able to wield knowledge and power transcending physical existence, and becomes a philosopher king. Thank you for watching, and sorry for the excessive wait. Rest assured it will only be 1 week until the next episode, and what an episode it will be. Stay tuned, as next week will be my grandest assertion yet. So grand, in fact, that I'll need some help explaining it. Until then, leave a comment if you agree, disagree, or are otherwise intrigued by my conclusions in this video, and I will see you next week.
Spun awkwardly out of the rain. She was an anxious refrain. Taking your time with the imperceptible, beautiful myths of becoming animal. Wasp to orchid, orchid to the wind. To move towards lesser different memories of a sorceress girl, endless fascination with the secrets of the world, dreams of the youth, those cute little